China at first is the second most powerful economic entity in the world. And they got there, once again, this is obviously all my opinion, they got there in large part, not completely, but to a substantial degree, by getting most favored nation designation during the Clinton administration. And therefore, to a great extent, because of the United States of America. And of course, they have a tremendous trade imbalance with a surplus on their part. So they have benefited tremendously. What people, and this again is my opinion, China actually thinks that as a group, a race, they're superior to the world, the whole world, and that they are kind of destined to dominate the world, and that but for particularly the Europeans, they would be dominating it today. The reality is today they have a stated goal to be the dominant force in the world. And when you look at who they are, particularly from a governmental standpoint, the People's Republic of China, they're a communist state dominated by one party, and they're certainly not a democracy. And in fact, they're anti-democracy. And they clearly are utterly ruthless as a government, utterly ruthless. The Chinese government would steal a hot stove and come back for the smoke. They play by no rules, as we understand it. And if you look at their size, their economic size, they're several times the size of Japan and Germany combined in World War II in 1940, in the late 1930s. So they're a real threat, existential threat to the United States of America. They stand for everything we're not. And they're not for individual freedom. They're not for democracy. In the early years, in the 90s, I talked to a guy, a congressman buddy of mine. He served for 10 years, from John Campbell from Orange County, California. And he told me, he said, look, we, being the Republicans in that period, thought, well, China can maybe go democratic or semi-democratic, that if we just give them a middle class, and we'll do that through trade, that they'll become more liberal in the democratic sense. And of course, the exact opposite happened. I mean, Xi is Mao Zedong on steroids. And as I said, they're completely totalitarian. I mean, they have as much control over there using technology and their philosophy to control their population as any nation in the history of the world. They have that social grading system where you can't take a damn plane if you jaywalk or something for 6 months or some period of time. I mean, they've introduced a control over the individual, the likes of which makes Orwell blush. They're using our trade, the deficit, the money they make off us, to do two things: build their military and buy our real estate. When you think about allowing an enemy, and they are an enemy, to do that, it's absurd. I mean, it's the height of naivete. I mean, they're establishing, through their Belt and Road Project, bases of operation as these third world countries default on the debt that they knew they were going to. Those are going to be military installations. Yeah. I've read where they own land on both sides of the Panama Canal. Well, Jesus, it work. Yeah. They don't think like us. Yeah. They don't have the same morality. They don't have the same values. And they look at us as incredibly naive, and they exploit it. And they have exploited it. And it's time to take a more realistic view. Do they add value to our economy? Absolutely, no question about it. But it can't be so grossly imbalanced as it is now. And you have to remember, once again, they'll steal anything that they think will help them. They buy real estate near military bases. Oh, I'm sure they're interested in agriculture. Yeah, come on, who's kidding who? You have to stop them, or they will go as far as you will let them. And that's not a debatable statement. it's a fact. They will go as far as they would take over the whole country if we let them. I think I can say this for my brother: he's not anti-free trade, but he's for fair trade, and he was against the favored nation treatment for China, and spoke out against it. But he was a distinct minority. Free trade reigned in Clinton and then Bush. Free trade, in theory, is a wonderful idea. It's perfect. It's ideal. But when one of your partners is cheating, and by cheating I mean they're putting tariffs on your stuff, but they don't want you to put it on their stuff, and gain an unfair advantage, that's generally not a good idea. Certainly I subscribe, once again I'm not speaking for my brother, but I subscribe to free trade's great, as long as the other side's playing fair too. Yeah. When they start playing unfair, and it's in your national interest. I mean, it's one thing to let them cheat on T-shirts or number 2 pencils. It's another thing to have them cheat on pharmaceuticals or components for defense weapons. That's a whole nother deal. And that's what's happened. The vast majority of the crucial pharmaceuticals, I believe, are made now in China. Well, my God, when you negotiate, you start from a strong, extreme position, right? I'm not buying your house. The roof looks like hell, and you know your plumbing's terrible. I don't even talk to me about it. Your price is ridiculous, right? And but if you get reasonable, maybe we'll talk a little. But right, I mean, what I observed is, once again as a citizen, is let's take NATO. He said, you know, we may have to step back here about defending you guys unless you start paying what you said you'd pay. And are not paying. Well, you'd say, well, wait a minute, he's threatening Europe. Well, he was bargaining. And a number of them stepped up. Right. We were subsidizing their social welfare program in part because they didn't pay, and we're defending them. I mean, I look at President Trump as, from afar, as a citizen. I don't know him. Met him, but I certainly don't know him. But he's a real estate guy from New York City. He's bargaining, and he's going to say something like, you know, I don't need your trash, you know. But you know, if you look reasonable, I might try to help you out. And so he's bargaining, and you have to look past the hyperbole. But his point that we got to do something about this trade imbalance, particularly with China, I think is very well taken. And I think we ignore it at our peril.